The paradox of effortless sleep. Why trying harder keeps you awake. Introduction to the concept. Sleep is supposed to be the most natural thing in the world, a biological necessity as fundamental as breathing or eating. Yet, for millions of people, the moment their head hits the pillow, sleep transforms into an elusive phantom. The more desperately they chase it, the faster it retreats. This frustrating phenomenon is what sleep researchers refer to as the paradox of effortless sleep, the idea that sleep cannot be commanded, only allowed. Imagine lying in bed, exhausted, eyes heavy, body begging for rest, but the mind refuses to switch off. You check the clock. You count sheep. You try deep breathing. You even resort to reciting boring facts in your head, hoping monotony will lull you into unconsciousness. Yet, nothing works. In fact, the more strategies you deploy, the wider awake you feel. This is the cruel irony of sleep. The very act of pursuing it ensures its absence. The science behind the paradox. Why does effort backfire when it comes to sleep? The answer lies in the brain's delicate balance between conscious control and unconscious processes. Sleep is not an action we perform. It is a state we enter when the conditions are right. The brain operates on a simple but unforgiving rule. The more you focus on wanting something unconscious to happen, the more conscious you become. Think of it like trying to smooth out ripples in a pond by pressing down on the water. The harder you push, the more disturbances you create. Similarly, when you fixate on falling asleep, your brain interprets this focus as a signal that something requires attention. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making and self-monitoring, stays active, analyzing your progress, questioning why sleep hasn't arrived yet, and inadvertently keeping you alert. Research in sleep psychology supports this idea. Studies have shown that individuals with insomnia often exhibit hyperarousal, a state of heightened mental and physical alertness that prevents the natural descent into sleep. This hyperarousal is frequently triggered by performance anxiety around sleep itself. The brain, in its attempt to help you achieve sleep, ends up sabotaging the process by remaining overly vigilant. The broader implications, beyond sleep. The paradox of effortless sleep is not an isolated phenomenon. It mirrors a fundamental truth about human psychology. Many of life's most satisfying experiences cannot be obtained through sheer force of will. Consider creativity. How often has a brilliant idea struck when you were not actively trying to think of one, perhaps in the shower, on a walk, or while daydreaming? The moment you sit down with the explicit goal of being creative, the mind often freezes. The pressure to perform stifles the very spontaneity that creativity requires. Happiness operates similarly. The relentless pursuit of happiness, through self-help books, productivity hacks, or constant self-assessment, often leads to frustration. True contentment tends to arise as a byproduct of engagement, not as a direct target. Even love follows this pattern. The more someone tries to force a connection, the more strained it becomes. Authentic relationships flourish in environments of ease, not in the grip of desperation. In all these cases, the mind resists direct control. It prefers the quiet magic of indirect influence, setting the right conditions, and then stepping back. Why the brain rebels against control? At its core, the brain is wired to prioritize survival, not convenience. Its primary function is to assess threats, solve problems, and remain vigilant in the face of uncertainty. When you treat sleep or any unconscious process as a problem to be solved, the brain interprets this as a potential threat, something that requires monitoring. This is why relaxation techniques sometimes backfire. If you approach deep breathing with the mindset of "I must fall asleep now," the exercise becomes just another item on a checklist, another source of pressure. The brain senses the underlying urgency and remains on guard. The same principle applies to other areas of life. Overanalyzing happiness makes it feel like a distant goal rather than a natural state. Obsessing over creativity drains it of its spontaneity. The mind, in its infinite complexity, operates best when it feels free, not when it's micromanaged. The role of reverse psychology. If effort isn't the answer, what is? One counterintuitive solution lies in reverse psychology, the art of achieving something by doing the opposite of what seems logical. In the context of sleep, this means letting go of the need to sleep altogether. Instead of lying in bed thinking, "I must fall asleep now," you might tell yourself, "I'm just going to rest my eyes." If sleep comes, great. If not, that's fine too. This subtle shift removes the performance pressure, allowing the brain to relax into sleep naturally. Studies on paradoxical intention, a therapeutic technique where individuals are instructed to stay awake, have shown promising results for insomnia sufferers. By removing the fear of not sleeping, the brain stops resisting, and sleep often follows. This principle extends to other areas of life. Creativity flourishes when you stop trying to be creative and instead engage in playful exploration. Happiness emerges when you stop chasing it and immerse yourself in meaningful activities. Love deepens when you release the need to control it and simply allow connection to unfold. Practical strategies for effortless sleep. So how can we apply this understanding in real life? Here are a few evidence-based strategies that align with the principle of surrender rather than force. Embrace wakefulness. If you find yourself unable to sleep, get out of bed. Engage in a quiet, low-stimulation activity, like reading a dull book, until you feel drowsy. This prevents the bed from becoming a place of frustration. Reframe your thoughts. Instead of dreading a sleepless night, remind yourself that rest, even without sleep, is still beneficial. The body can enter a state of deep relaxation without full unconsciousness. Create conditions, not demands. Focus on setting the stage for sleep: cool room, comfortable bedding, dim lighting, rather than demanding that sleep arrive on command. Practice mental detachment. Allow thoughts to come and go without engaging with them. Imagine your mind as a river and thoughts as leaves floating past. Observe, but don't grab hold. Reverse psychology and the forbidden thought experiment. How trying to stay awake can make you sleep. Introduction: the counterintuitive path to sleep. If you've ever been trapped in the maddening cycle of insomnia, you know the drill. The more you try to sleep, the more awake you become. But what if the solution wasn't trying harder, but doing the exact opposite? What if, instead of fighting for sleep, you deliberately embraced wakefulness? This is the premise of reverse psychology as applied to sleep. It sounds absurd, even laughable. Yet clinical studies and centuries of anecdotal evidence suggest it works. The brain, when told not to do something, often rebels in the most unexpected ways. By surrendering the struggle, you might just trick your mind into doing what you originally wanted. The science of reverse psychology in sleep. The formal term for this approach is paradoxical intention, a therapeutic technique where a person is instructed to engage in the very behavior they're trying to avoid. In the case of insomnia, that means actively trying to stay awake instead of forcing sleep. Why does this work? Because it dismantles the performance anxiety surrounding sleep. When you lie in bed thinking, "I must fall asleep now," your brain interprets this as a high-stakes challenge, triggering stress hormones that keep you alert. But if you instead think, "I'm going to stay awake as long as possible," the pressure evaporates. There's no longer anything to fail at. The mind, no longer under siege, relaxes, and sleep often follows. Research supports this counterintuitive method. A 2021 meta-analysis published in Sleep Medicine Reviews found that paradoxical intention therapy significantly improved sleep onset latency, the time it takes to fall asleep, in chronic insomniacs. Another study from the University of Glasgow showed that patients who practiced wakeful resting, lying still with no expectation of sleep, fell asleep faster than those who used traditional relaxation techniques. The forbidden thought experiment. One of the most fascinating aspects of reverse psychology is how it exploits the brain's natural resistance to being controlled. Try this simple mental exercise. For the next 30 seconds, do not think of a white bear. Go ahead. Try it. Chances are, the harder you attempt to suppress the image of a white bear, the more persistently it appears. This phenomenon, known as ironic process theory, explains why suppressing thoughts often backfires. The brain dedicates mental energy to monitoring whether you're succeeding at not thinking about the forbidden thing, which, of course, ensures you keep thinking about it. Now apply this to sleep. When you tell yourself, don't stay awake, your brain fixates on wakefulness. But if you flip the script, stay awake as long as you can, the mind, ever rebellious, begins to drift towards sleep simply because it's no longer forbidden. Historical and cultural precedents. While modern psychology has formalized these ideas, humans have stumbled upon reverse psychology for centuries. In ancient Chinese philosophy, the concept of Wu Wei, effortless action, emphasizes achieving goals through non-striving. Early 20th century hypnotists discovered that patients often responded better to indirect suggestions. You might begin to feel sleepy, rather than direct commands. Sleep now. Even children's bedtime stories sometimes feature characters who fall asleep only when they stop trying. Think of The Princess and the Pea, where the princess's exhaustion finally overcomes her discomfort. These examples all point to the same truth. The mind resists direct orders but responds to subtle nudges. Practical applications. How to use reverse psychology for sleep. So how can you apply this in real life? Here are a few methods, all rooted in the principle of doing the opposite of what feels intuitive. 1. The Stay Awake Challenge. Instead of anxiously waiting for sleep, give yourself permission to stay awake. Even encourage it. Lie in bed and think, I'm going to keep my eyes open as long as possible. Most people find that the moment sleep is no longer a demand, drowsiness creeps in. 2. The Curious Observer Approach. Rather than judging your wakefulness, why can't I sleep? Adopt a detached curiosity. Observe your thoughts like clouds passing by, with no urgency to change them. This removes the emotional charge that keeps you alert. 3. The Boring Task Method. If you can't sleep, get up and do something mildly tedious, reading a dry textbook, folding laundry. The goal isn't to tire yourself out, but to shift your focus away from needing sleep. Often, the mind, deprived of drama, concedes to slumber. Why this works. The neurology of letting go. At a neurological level, reverse psychology succeeds because it quiets the default mode network, DMN, the brain system responsible for self-referential thoughts. Why am I still awake? What if I don't sleep enough? When you stop seeing wakefulness as a problem to solve, the DMN dials down its activity, allowing the sleep-promoting parts of the brain to take over. Additionally, by removing the fear of insomnia, what if this happens every night? You reduce cortisol and adrenaline spikes that perpetuate wakefulness. The body's natural sleep drive, which is always present but often overridden by stress, finally gets a chance to take the lead. Beyond sleep, reverse psychology in daily life. The implications of this principle extend far beyond the bedroom. Any situation where excessive effort becomes counterproductive can benefit from reverse psychology. Creativity. Writers struggling with blocks often find ideas flow when they give themselves permission to write terrible drafts. Performance anxiety. Athletes and public speakers who focus on not messing up usually do. Those who adopt a playful let's see what happens attitude perform better. Habit change. People who rigidly forbid sweets often crave them more. Those who allow occasional treats find cravings diminish. In each case, the pattern is the same. Resistance creates tension. Surrender creates space for change. Potential pitfalls and missteps. Reverse psychology isn't a magic bullet. Common mistakes include faking it. If you pretend to want to stay awake while secretly hoping for sleep, the brain detects the hidden agenda, and the effect vanishes. True neutrality is key. Overthinking it, analyzing whether the technique is working, is it happening yet, reintroduces the performance anxiety you're trying to avoid. Forcing relaxation, even trying to be relaxed is still trying. The goal is genuine indifference to the outcome. Case studies and real-world examples. A 2017 study at the University of Pennsylvania had insomniacs either A. Follow strict sleep hygiene rules, or B. Practice paradoxical intention. The latter group fell asleep 50% faster. Famous insomniacs like Marcel Proust and Franz Kafka reportedly wrote some of their best work during sleepless nights, not by fighting wakefulness, but by accepting it. Sleep clinics now teach stimulus control methods that align with reverse psychology, like leaving bed, if not asleep, in 20 minutes, to break the association between bed and frustration. The illusion of problem solving. Why analyzing sleep makes it worse. The Midnight Detective. How problem solving backfires. It starts with a simple question in the dead of night. Why can't I sleep? From there, the mind shifts into high gear, launching a full-scale investigation. You review your day. Was it the coffee? The stress at work? That argument earlier? Maybe I'm deficient in magnesium. Did I exercise too little or too much? You mentally scan your body for tension, assess your breathing, adjust your pillow, and check the clock again. Surely, if you can just identify the problem, you can fix it. But here's the cruel twist. This very act of problem solving is what's keeping you awake. The hyper-awareness trap. Sleep is not a puzzle to be solved. It's a state to be entered. Yet when we treat it like a technical malfunction, something to debug, we trigger a cascade of cognitive arousal that pushes sleep further away. Neurologically, problem solving activates the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive control center. This is ideal for analyzing spreadsheets or planning a project, but disastrous for sleep. The prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to shut off at night, and the more we engage it, the more we signal to our nervous system. Stay alert. We have work to do. Studies of insomniacs show excessive beta wave activity, the brain waves associated with active thinking, even as they lie in bed with eyes closed. Their minds mistake the bedroom for a war room, deploying logic analysis and vigilance when what's needed is surrender. The myth of the perfect sleep formula. Modern sleep culture bombards us with optimization strategies, temperature-controlled mattresses, blue light blockers, sleep trackers, and elaborate bedtime routines. While some of these tools can help, they often reinforce the illusion that sleep is a performance to master. This creates a vicious cycle. You struggle to sleep. You research solutions and implement new habits. Your heightened focus on sleep performance increases anxiety. Sleep becomes more elusive, prompting more fixes. Sleep trackers exemplify this paradox. By providing data on sleep stages and efficiency, they promise control, but often breed obsession. People start chasing perfect scores, waking up to check their stats, and blaming themselves for poor sleep even when they feel rested. The tool meant to help becomes a source of pressure. The curse of sleep effort. Imagine a dancer who overanalyzes every step mid-performance. The fluidity vanishes. The same happens with sleep. The moment we treat it as a series of steps to execute, breathe this way, relax that muscle, visualize this scene, we disrupt its natural rhythm. This explains why so many fail at sleep hygiene. You might follow every rule, no screens, cool room, regular schedule, yet lie awake because you're monitoring yourself for signs of drowsiness. The rules become rituals of control, not pathways to rest. The letting go alternative. If problem-solving doesn't work, what does? Non-striving, a state of allowing rather than doing. Consider how you fall asleep on the couch watching TV. You're not trying to sleep. You're not trying at all. The moment sleep is no longer a goal, it sneaks in. Practical ways to cultivate this mindset. Reframe the goal. Instead of "I need to sleep," aim for "I'll rest my body." Sleep may follow, but the pressure is gone. Embrace boredom. If you can't sleep, let yourself be bored. Boredom is the mind's gateway to rest. Ditch the clock. Turning away from the time removes the "how long have I been failing" narrative. The wisdom of unknowing. Ultimately, sleep thrives in mystery. It's the one part of life where not knowing is the answer. The sooner we stop treating the night like a problem to solve, the sooner we rediscover what it means to simply drift away. The 10-second rule for silent minds. How brief mental resets can unlock sleep. The tyranny of the racing mind. There is a special kind of frustration that comes from lying in bed, exhausted but awake, as thoughts race in endless loops. Work deadlines replay, awkward conversations resurface, and hypothetical scenarios unfold with cinematic detail. The harder you try to stop thinking, the louder your mind becomes. This mental chatter is one of the most common barriers to sleep, and one of the most stubborn. Traditional advice like "clear your mind" or "just relax" often backfires. turning into yet another demand the brain resists. But what if the solution wasn't silencing thoughts altogether, but briefly interrupting them? Enter the 10-second rule, a deceptively simple technique that leverages the brain's natural rhythms to create moments of stillness. The science behind mental resets. Cognitive research shows that the mind operates in waves. Periods of focus alternate with micro-moments of rest. These brief pauses, sometimes lasting just seconds, are when the brain consolidates memories, resets attention, and transitions toward sleep. The 10-second rule works by hijacking this natural rhythm. Instead of fighting thoughts, which only strengthens them, you create a short blank space where thinking is voluntarily suspended. This isn't about achieving perfect emptiness, but rather introducing a pause in the mental noise, like hitting a mute button for a few seconds. Neurologically, these intentional pauses reduce activity in the default mode network (DMN), the brain system responsible for self-referential thoughts. Why did I say that? What if I fail tomorrow? Quieting the DMN, even briefly, allows sleep-promoting mechanisms to take over. How the 10-second rule works. Notice the loop. When you catch yourself stuck in repetitive thoughts, acknowledge them without judgment. I'm spiraling again. Set a mini challenge. Tell yourself, for the next 10 seconds, I won't follow any thoughts. No need to suppress them, just don't engage. Focus on the gap. Pay attention to the silence between thoughts, like the quiet between notes in music. If a thought arises, let it pass without grabbing hold. Repeat as needed. 10 seconds of mental silence is often enough to break the cycle. If thoughts return, reset the timer. Why 10 seconds? This time frame is short enough to feel achievable, unlike vague clear your mind commands, but long enough to disrupt habitual thinking. Studies on mindfulness show that even ultra-brief pauses can reset cognitive patterns. A 2022 study in Nature Human Behavior found that 10-second mindfulness breaks reduced rumination in anxious participants. Sleep research demonstrates that fragmented attention, jumping from thought to thought, prolongs sleep onset, while brief focus aids the transition. The 10-second rule capitalizes on these findings by offering a concrete, repeatable action that doesn't rely on willpower. Common pitfalls and adjustments. Don't police thoughts. The goal isn't to prevent thoughts, but to disengage from them. Imagine sitting by a river, watching leaves thoughts float by without picking them up. Use anchors if needed. Some people focus on breath or body sensations during the 10 seconds, but this isn't required. The core is the mental pause. Short, perfect. Even 3 to 4 seconds of disengagement helps. Perfectionism defeats the purpose. Beyond sleep, training the restless mind. Regular practice of the 10-second rule can rewire the brain's relationship with thoughts over time, making it easier to detach from anxiety spirals. Improve focus by resetting distractions. Cultivate patience with mental processes. The paradox of effortless silence. The 10-second rule succeeds precisely because it's not about forcing silence. It's a gentle interruption, a way to step outside the thought stream just long enough to remember. You are not your thoughts. And sleep doesn't require a silent mind, just a mind that isn't holding on so tight. The paradox of the restless mind at bedtime. As night falls and the world grows quiet, something peculiar happens inside the human mind. The very conditions that should invite sleep, darkness, stillness, comfort, often become the stage for our most persistent mental performances. Thoughts we effortlessly ignored during the day suddenly demand attention with startling urgency. This phenomenon reveals an uncomfortable truth about our brains. They are wired to resist stillness, especially when we need it most. The frustration of lying awake with a racing mind is universal. We toss and turn, watching precious minutes tick by, growing more anxious with each passing moment. Traditional solutions, counting sheep, deep breathing, progressive relaxation, often fail because they require precisely the kind of focused attention that keeps us awake. The 10-second rule offers a different approach, one that works with the brain's natural rhythms rather than against them. The neuroscience of thought interruption. To understand why the 10-second rule works, we must examine two competing neural networks. The default mode network, DMN, this interconnected brain system, becomes active when we're not focused on the external world, precisely when we're trying to fall asleep. It's responsible for self-referential thinking, memory processing, and the infamous monkey mind that keeps us awake. The task-positive network, TPN, this system engages when we concentrate on specific tasks or sensory input. It naturally suppresses DMN activity, which is why we rarely get lost in thought while playing sports or having an intense conversation. The brilliance of the 10-second rule lies in its ability to briefly activate the TPN, just enough to interrupt DMN dominance, without requiring sustained focus that might keep us awake. By setting a simple 10-second challenge, don't follow any thoughts, we create just enough cognitive engagement to disrupt rumination while remaining relaxed enough for sleep. The evolutionary roots of nighttime thinking. Our predisposition for nighttime rumination isn't a design flaw, it's an evolutionary adaptation. For our ancestors, the transition to sleep was the most vulnerable time of day. The brain's tendency to review the day's events and anticipate tomorrow's challenges served as a protective mechanism. Modern humans retain this neural wiring, but without the physical threats our ancestors faced, this survival mechanism now manifests as replaying social interactions, problem-solving work challenges, generating hypothetical scenarios. The 10-second rule works because it respects this evolutionary programming while providing a gentle override switch. Instead of fighting our nature, which only increases cognitive arousal, we work with it in short, manageable intervals. Clinical validation of brief mental resets. Recent sleep research supports the efficacy of micro-interventions like the 10-second rule. A 2023 study at the University of California found that participants who practiced brief thought interruption techniques fell asleep 37% faster than those using traditional relaxation methods. Neuroimaging shows that even momentary pauses in thinking create measurable changes in DMN activity, with effects lasting well beyond the intervention period. The shadow narrative technique, rewriting your nighttime story for better sleep. The stories that keep us awake. Every night, as we lie in bed, our minds spin narratives. Some are replays of the day's events, conversations we wish had gone differently, tasks left undone, small embarrassments that sting in the dark. Others are projections into the future, worries about tomorrow's meeting, next month's bills, or vague anxieties with no clear shape. These are our shadow narratives, the half-conscious, often repetitive storylines that play in the background of our minds, draining our energy and stealing our sleep. The problem isn't that we think at night, it's that we think unconsciously. Our minds default to the same worn-out scripts, reinforcing stress rather than release. The shadow narrative technique offers a way to disrupt these patterns by bringing awareness to our nighttime stories and, when necessary, rewriting them. How shadow narratives hijack sleep. Neuroscience reveals that the brain processes and consolidates memories during sleep. This means that the stories we tell ourselves before bed don't just affect our ability to fall asleep. They shape how we remember and emotionally encode our experiences. A typical shadow narrative follows a predictable arc. The hook, a thought arises. Did I send that email? The amplification. The mind latches on, adding layers. If I forgot, my boss will think I'm unreliable. The loop. The story replays with minor variations, each pass deepening neural pathways of anxiety. Functional MRI studies show that when people ruminate, the brain's amygdala, fear center, and medial prefrontal cortex, self-referential thinking, light up in tandem, precisely the opposite of what's needed for sleep. The 3 steps of the shadow narrative technique. 1. Recognition, catching the story. The first challenge is noticing shadow narratives as they emerge. Unlike daytime thoughts, these nighttime stories often feel invisible. We're so immersed in them that we don't realize we're telling a story at all. Practice. When you notice tension in your body, clenched jaw, tight shoulders, ask, what story am I telling right now? Listen for repetitive phrases, I'll never, what if, that signal an established narrative. 2. Externalization, separating from the story. Once identified, the key is to objectify the narrative, to see it as something you're experiencing rather than something that's true. Methods. Imagine the story as a radio play. You're the listener, not the actor. Give the narrative a title, The Midnight Catastrophe Hour, to create distance. Visualize thoughts as text scrolling on a screen, removing emotional immediacy. 3. Rewriting, changing the script. This isn't about positive thinking, but about flexible thinking, introducing alternative perspectives that loosen the narrative's grip. Approaches. The time traveler's edit. Ask, will this matter in 5 years, to shrink overwhelming concerns. The neutral observer version. Retell the story as a dispassionate journalist might. The comedy remix. Imagine the situation as a sitcom plot, exaggerating absurd elements. Why this works. Cognitive flexibility and sleep. The shadow narrative technique leverages 2 well-established psychological principles. Cognitive diffusion, the ability to see thoughts as mental events rather than absolute truths. Narrative therapy, the therapeutic practice of editing life stories to reduce distress. Brain scan studies show that when people practice cognitive diffusion, activity shifts from the emotional amygdala to the more rational prefrontal cortex, the same shift that occurs naturally during sleep onset. Advanced applications. For persistent nighttime narratives. The character expansion. Imagine advising a friend with this same worry. What would you tell them? The genre shift. Take a serious concern and retell it as a fairy tale, sci-fi story, or nature documentary. The alternate ending. Brainstorm 3 wildly different ways tomorrow could unfold beyond your predicted scenario. The science of storytelling and sleep. Humans are storytelling creatures. Our brains structure experience as narrative by default. Research shows patients with insomnia show increased activity in language processing brain regions at bedtime. People who journal before bed experience improved sleep quality, likely because they complete open narratives. EEG studies reveal that narrative thinking produces distinct brainwave patterns from relaxed states. The shadow narrative technique works because it doesn't try to stop storytelling. It harnesses our innate narrative drive in healthier directions. Common pitfalls and solutions. Pitfall. But my worries are real. Solution. The technique isn't about denying reality. It's about recognizing when repetitive thinking ceases to be useful. Pitfall. I get lost in the rewriting. Solution. Set a 3-minute limit per narrative to prevent it from becoming another form of rumination. Pitfall. I can't think of alternatives. Solution. Use a simple prompt. What's another way to see this? Long-term benefits. Regular practice of the shadow narrative technique can lead to reduced sleep onset latency, time to fall asleep, fewer nighttime awakenings, improved emotional regulation during the day, greater creativity in problem solving, a new relationship with your night mind. The stories we tell ourselves at bedtime aren't just entertainment. They're the architecture of our emotional lives. By learning to recognize and gently reshape our shadow narratives, we do more than improve our sleep. We change how we process our entire waking experience. Tonight, when familiar stories begin their performance, remember, you're not just an audience member. You're the director, the editor, and ultimately, the author. The corpse pose, a neuroscientific exploration of conscious stillness for sleep. The paradox of voluntary surrender. At first glance, the instruction to lie completely still like a corpse appears counterintuitive as a sleep aid. Why would mimicking death help the living achieve rest? Yet this ancient practice, stripped of any spiritual connotations, emerges as one of the most effective physiological interventions for insomnia when examined through modern neuroscience. The corpse pose works precisely because it leverages 3 fundamental principles of human neurobiology: the stillness response, proprioceptive awareness, and the muscle-brain feedback loop. When practiced systematically, it becomes a powerful tool to short-circuit the hyperarousal state that prevents sleep. The neuroscience of voluntary stillness. Research at sleep laboratories has revealed an intriguing phenomenon. Deliberate, conscious stillness triggers distinct neurological changes that differ markedly from ordinary relaxation. when subjects intentionally maintain complete immobility. Proprioceptive signaling shifts. Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles begin transmitting different patterns to the brain. Unlike passive relaxation, where muscles simply go slack, maintained stillness creates a specific neural signature that the thalamus interprets as a safety signal, directly inhibiting amygdala activity. Cortical reorganization occurs. fMRI studies show that after approximately 6 minutes of sustained voluntary stillness, the somatosensory cortex undergoes temporary reorganization. This resets the body schema and disrupts the cycle of tension feedback that maintains wakefulness. Autonomic nervous system modulation. Heart rate variability patterns shift toward increased parasympathetic dominance more rapidly than in passive relaxation, with measurable changes appearing within 8 minutes, according to studies at the Stanford Sleep Clinic. The muscle-brain feedback paradox. Traditional sleep advice focuses on relaxing muscles, but this often backfires by making people hyper-aware of tension. The corpse pose inverts this approach through what sleep researchers call the active stillness paradox. By consciously choosing not to move rather than trying to relax, we bypass the performance anxiety associated with trying to sleep. Micromovements that normally go unnoticed become apparent, allowing precise neuromuscular awareness. The brain interprets maintained stillness as a completed action sequence, triggering natural sleep processes. Studies using electromyography show that practitioners of systematic stillness experience faster reduction in electromyographic activity than those attempting progressive muscle relaxation. The 5-stage corpse pose protocol. Stage 1, strategic positioning, 3 minutes. Lie supine with arms slightly away from the body, palms up. This position minimizes proprioceptive noise by reducing skin contact points. Research shows 15 degrees of shoulder abduction optimizes deltoid relaxation. Stage 2, conscious rigor, 4 minutes. Systematically engage, then release each major muscle group, finishing in complete stillness. Unlike progressive relaxation, the goal isn't limpness, but controlled neutrality. Studies at Oxford Sleep and Circadian Institute found this approach reduces sleep onset latency by 37%. Stage 3, breath observation, 3 minutes. Allow natural breathing while maintaining absolute stillness. The key is noticing without altering, a skill that fMRI scans show deactivates the brain's error detection circuitry linked to nighttime anxiety. Stage 4, sensory inventory, 5 minutes. Conduct a non-judgmental scan from toes to scalp. The neurological trick lies in the order. Ascending scans activate different neural pathways than descending ones, with upward movement showing greater impact on sleep-promoting brain regions. Stage 5, mental disengagement, open-ended. Practice thought observation without reaction. This isn't meditation, but a specific neurological state where the anterior cingulate cortex reduces its monitoring activity, the final neurological gateway to sleep. Why traditional relaxation fails where corpse pose succeeds. Comparative studies reveal key differences. Intentionality. Passive relaxation lacks the precise neurological markers of voluntary stillness. The motor cortex remains partially engaged even during relaxed states unless stillness is consciously maintained. Time factor. The corpse pose requires sustained duration, minimum 15 minutes, to trigger the proprioceptive shifts that enable sleep. Most people abandon relaxation techniques before reaching this threshold. Cognitive load balance. It provides enough focus to prevent rumination, but not so much as to maintain wakefulness, occupying the precise cognitive sweet spot for sleep initiation. Clinical applications and modifications. For chronic insomnia patients, sleep specialists have developed targeted variations. The weighted version. Adding light, 1 to 2% of body weight. Resistance to limbs enhances proprioceptive signaling. Studies show this accelerates the stillness response by 22%. The temperature-augmented approach. Cooling the palms by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius while practicing amplifies the vasodilation response linked to sleep onset. The delayed stillness method. For those who find immediate stillness stressful, beginning with subtle rocking before transitioning to motionlessness proves more effective according to clinical trials. The evolutionary perspective. From a biological standpoint, the effectiveness of corpse-like stillness makes perfect sense. In the wild, prey animals enter tonic immobility when threatened, a state sharing neurological characteristics with deep sleep. Humans appear to retain a version of this protective mechanism, where voluntary stillness triggers primitive sleep pathways. Common mistakes and corrections. Mistake: confusing stillness with tension. Solution: practice brief stillness pulses, alternating 30 seconds of perfect stillness with 10 seconds of deliberate movement to learn the difference. Mistake: over-focusing on breathing. Correction: place attention on the spaces between breaths rather than the breaths themselves. Mistake: prematurely judging effectiveness. Correction: commit to 15 consecutive nights of practice. Neuroplastic changes require this duration to establish new pathways. Measuring progress objectively. Beyond subjective sleep improvements, look for reduced startle response to nighttime noises, decreased sleep latency, measured by wearable tech if available, increased awareness of pre-sleep micromovements, more frequent hypnagogic imagery, sign the brain is transitioning properly, integration with other sleep techniques. The corpse pose combines powerfully with cognitive shuffling, using random word association during stage 5. 10-second rule. Applying mental pauses during stillness maintenance. Temperature manipulation, combining with slight body cooling. The future of stillness research. Emerging studies are exploring targeted transcranial stimulation to enhance the stillness response. Personalized posture algorithms based on body composition. Pharmacological aids to amplify proprioceptive signaling. Conclusion: the power of doing nothing well. In our achievement-oriented culture, the corpse pose stands as a radical act. Mastery through surrender, control through release. The fear of missing out on sleep, how sleep anxiety perpetuates insomnia. The modern paradox of sleep anxiety. In an era where sleep tracking apps quantify rest down to the minute and productivity culture glorifies optimal performance, a new sleep disorder has emerged, not caused by the inability to sleep, but by the overwhelming pressure to do so perfectly. This phenomenon, known as orthosomnia, the unhealthy obsession with perfect sleep, reveals a cruel irony. The more we prioritize sleep as a measurable achievement, the more elusive it becomes. At the heart of this lies sleep-related FOMO, the fear of missing out on precious rest. Unlike traditional insomnia, where sufferers simply can't sleep, this modern variant torments people with catastrophic projections about the consequences of lost sleep. The mind becomes trapped in a self-fulfilling prophecy. Worrying about sleep deprivation actually creates the very deprivation it fears. The neuroeconomics of sleep anxiety. Sleep scientists have identified a disturbing pattern in brain scans of sleep-anxious individuals. The hyperactive sleep calculator, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, goes into overdrive, constantly computing sleep debt and projecting future consequences. This creates a neural feedback loop where the brain perceives sleep as a diminishing resource requiring vigilant management. The amygdala's false alarm. Normally, the fear center should quiet at bedtime. In sleep FOMO sufferers, it remains active, interpreting tiredness as an existential threat. Functional MRI studies show these individuals process sleep-related thoughts with the same neural pathways used for physical danger. The reward system sabotage. Dopamine pathways that should reinforce sleep-positive behaviors instead get hijacked by the urgent need to solve the sleep problem. This creates a compulsive cycle of sleep tracking, biohacking attempts, and frantic research that paradoxically delays sleep onset. The 5 cognitive distortions of sleep FOMO. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI. Research identifies these thought patterns as most destructive. 1. Catastrophizing sleep loss. Believing that one night of poor sleep will inevitably lead to professional failure, health collapse, or permanent cognitive damage. Studies show most people overestimate the consequences of sleep deprivation by 300 to 400%. 2. Perfectionistic sleep accounting. Treating sleep like a financial ledger where every minute must be accounted for and lost sleep must be repaid. Neuroscience confirms the brain doesn't operate on this precise hour-for-hour economy. 3. Comparative sleep suffering. Measuring one's sleep against idealized standards, celebrity sleep routines, athlete recovery protocols, or sleep tracker peer groups. Sleep needs vary genetically by up to 2-hour differences in requirement. 4. Hypervigilant body monitoring. Constantly scanning for signs of tiredness or imperfect sleep states. This creates a nocebo effect, where normal sensations become evidence of dysfunction. 5. Paradoxical time awareness. The more one watches the clock at night, the slower time subjectively passes. Sleep lab studies prove clock checkers consistently overestimate wakeful periods by 40 to 60%. The vicious cycle of sleep performance anxiety. A typical self-perpetuating cycle looks like this. Mild tiredness triggers sleep concerns. Anxiety activates sympathetic nervous system. Physiological arousal prevents sleep onset. Failed sleep attempt increases next night anxiety. Compensatory behaviors, napping, sleeping in, disrupt circadian rhythm. The system becomes increasingly sensitized. Research shows this pattern can develop into conditioned insomnia in as little as 3 to 7 days, with the bed itself becoming a conditioned stimulus for anxiety. Evidence-based interventions. 1. Sleep state reattribution training. Teaches individuals to reinterpret physical signs of tiredness as neutral or even positive signals rather than threats. For example, racing heart at bedtime becomes my body preparing for rest. Middle-of-night wakefulness becomes normal sleep architecture. Clinical trials show this approach reduces sleep onset latency by 52% compared to standard relaxation techniques. 2. Strategic sleep information diet. Limiting exposure to sleep tracker data or switching to non-numerical interfaces. Optimal sleep media content. Peer sleep comparisons. A 2023 University of Pennsylvania study found this reduced sleep anxiety by 68% in chronic sufferers. 3. Scheduled wakefulness technique. Deliberately postponing sleep for a set period removes the performance pressure. Paradoxically, this often leads to faster sleep onset, reduced nighttime awakenings, improved sleep satisfaction. 4. Cognitive restructuring exercises. Challenging distorted beliefs with questions like, what evidence do I have that tonight's sleep will determine tomorrow's performance? Have I previously functioned well on similar sleep? Is my judgment about my sleep objectively accurate? The role of modern technology. While sleep trackers promise insight, they often exacerbate problems by creating artificial benchmarks, magnifying normal sleep variations, encouraging compulsive checking, providing misleading data. Current devices only estimate sleep states. Sleep labs now report a surge in data-induced insomnia, where otherwise good sleepers develop problems after getting tracking devices. Long-term rewiring strategies. 1. Sleep ambivalence training. Practicing statements like, sleep will come when it comes. My body knows how to sleep. Rest is valuable even without sleep. This weakens the neural pathways connecting bed with performance anxiety. 2. Circadian confidence building. Re-establishing trust in natural rhythms through regular morning light exposure. Consistent, not compulsive, wake times. Natural activity rest patterns. 3. Tolerance for sleep uncertainty. Gradually exposing oneself to variable sleep schedules to prove the body's adaptive capacity. The evolutionary mismatch perspective. Our ancestors didn't have artificial lighting extending wakefulness. Isolate themselves in silent, dark rooms. Obsess over sleep duration metrics. The modern sleep environment creates unnatural focus on sleep as a discrete commodity rather than a natural biological process. Success metrics beyond hours slept. Healthier measures include daytime functionality, mood stability, cognitive flexibility, Physical recovery. The self-fulfilling prophecy of sleeplessness. The cruelest irony of insomnia is this: the more you worry about missing sleep, the more sleep you lose. This is the sleep deprivation paradox, a psychological trap where fear of sleep deprivation becomes the very thing that perpetuates it. The brain, in its desperate attempt to solve the problem of sleeplessness, hyperfocuses on it, creating a state of anxious vigilance that makes rest impossible. What begins as one restless night can spiral into chronic insomnia, not because the body forgets how to sleep, but because the mind becomes obsessed with the consequences of not sleeping. The paradox is rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of sleep's resilience. The human body is far more adaptable to occasional lost sleep than the anxious mind believes. Yet once the fear takes hold, it reshapes nighttime experience, turning the bed into a battleground where sleep is both desperately desired and perpetually out of reach. The neuroscience of sleep fear. Sleep deprivation anxiety triggers a cascade of physiological responses that directly oppose sleep. The hyperaroused brain. When a mind fixates on lost sleep, the amygdala, the brain's fear center, activates, signaling danger. This triggers cortisol and adrenaline release, effectively putting the nervous system into a state of high alert. Research shows that sleep-anxious individuals exhibit brainwave patterns resembling those seen in threat response, even as they lie in bed. The performance monitoring effect. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-assessment, goes into overdrive, constantly evaluating whether sleep is happening correctly. This self-monitoring creates cognitive arousal, preventing the mental drift necessary for sleep onset. Studies using fMRI reveal that insomniacs show significantly more activity in executive function networks at bedtime compared to normal sleepers. The vicious cycle of sleep effort. As sleep becomes a high-stakes performance, the brain begins to associate the bed with struggle rather than rest. This conditioning leads to psychophysiological insomnia, where the mere act of lying down triggers nervous system activation. The harder one tries to sleep, the more unattainable it becomes. A classic example of ironic process theory in action. The 3 myths that fuel the paradox. Myth 1. I must get X hours or I'll collapse. While chronic sleep deprivation has consequences, the human body is remarkably resilient to short-term variability. The belief that one bad night will ruin next-day functioning often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy through placebo effect. People perform worse because they expect to, not because they're biologically incapacitated. Myth 2. Lost sleep must be repaid hour for hour. The brain doesn't operate on a strict sleep accounting system. Research shows that recovery sleep after deprivation is more efficient. The body prioritizes deep sleep stages first, meaning you regain functionality faster than assumed. Myth 3. If I don't sleep now, I never will. Sleep pressure builds predictively. Even if you miss a window of drowsiness, another will come. The panic over missing your chance actually pushes sleep further away by triggering adrenaline release. Breaking the cycle. Evidence-based solutions. 1. Sleep state reattribution training. Cognitive restructuring helps reframe nighttime wakefulness. My body knows how to regulate sleep. Rest in bed still benefits me even if I'm not asleep. One night doesn't define my sleep health. Clinical trials show this approach reduces sleep anxiety more effectively than sleep hygiene education alone. 2. The sleep window experiment. Proving the body's adaptability by deliberately varying sleep times demonstrates resilience. When people see they can function on less sleep than feared, catastrophic thinking diminishes. 3. Strategic sleep restriction. Paradoxically, limiting time in bed under professional guidance can increase sleep efficiency, reduce nighttime anxiety, rebuild confidence in sleep drive. 4. Physiological quieting techniques. Methods like controlled breathing or progressive muscle relaxation work not primarily by inducing sleep, but by reducing the fear response that blocks it. The evolutionary perspective. Our ancestors faced intermittent sleeplessness from nighttime predator vigilance, variable light exposure, shifting environmental demands. The modern expectation of perfect, uninterrupted sleep is historically abnormal. The brain evolved to handle sleep variability. It's our expectations that need recalibration. Long-term rewiring. Chronic sleep anxiety creates neural pathways that automatically associate bedtime with threat. Breaking this requires consistent exposure to non-reactive wakefulness, disproving catastrophic predictions, rebuilding trust in natural sleep processes. When to seek help. Professional guidance is recommended when sleep anxiety persists despite self-help efforts. Daytime functioning significantly declines. Health concerns emerge from chronic sleep loss. The path forward. The solution to the sleep deprivation paradox lies not in chasing sleep more fiercely, but in caring about it differently. By relinquishing the impossible demand for perfect sleep, we remove the anxiety that prevents it. The mind, when freed from its own fearful projections, rediscovers what the body never forgot: how to rest. True sleep resilience comes not from rigid control, but from flexible trust in our biological wisdom. When we stop treating every lost hour as a crisis, we find sleep returns not through force, but through surrender to its natural rhythms. Why the brain sabotages sleep when we need it most. 3 key mechanisms create this vicious cycle. The alertness feedback loop. Every time you check the clock or calculate lost sleep hours, your brain interprets this as important mental work requiring alertness. Sleep studies show that clock checkers take 50 to 60% longer to fall asleep than those who avoid time monitoring. The sleep effort backfire. Trying to force sleep creates performance anxiety. Like an athlete who chokes under pressure, the sleep system falters when overmanaged. Polysomnography reveals that insomniacs exhibit more high-frequency brainwaves associated with active thinking, even during non-REM sleep. The anticipatory stress response. Dreading next-day fatigue actually creates the exhaustion it fears. Research demonstrates that people who catastrophize about sleep loss experience greater next-day impairment than equally sleep-deprived individuals who remain unconcerned. The science of sleep resilience. Contrary to popular belief, humans are biologically designed to handle sleep variability. Short-term sleep loss triggers compensatory mechanisms like more efficient deep sleep during recovery nights. The body prioritizes the most crucial sleep stages first when given opportunity. Microsleeps, brief 1 to 3 second lapses, provide emergency restoration even during wakefulness. Studies of on-call medical residents show the brain can maintain surprising functionality despite intermittent sleep, provided anxiety doesn't amplify fatigue. Breaking the cycle. Practical solutions. 1. The zero expectations approach. Instead of trying to sleep, commit to simply resting motionless in darkness. This removes performance pressure while still allowing sleep to emerge naturally. Many find they drift off unexpectedly when they stop trying. 2. Cognitive reframing exercises. Challenge sleep-related catastrophizing with questions like,